Welcome back to the Munn Avenue Muse podcast. So delightful you could join us hopefully again or for the first time. This is presented to you by the MunnAvenuePress.com. We design, edit, publish books on Amazon and worldwide, Barnes & Noble and other places. And I'm so delighted today to have a really wonderful, interesting, marvelous human being and guest in Holly Hudson, who is multi-talented. She's a ghostwriter, a stand-up comedian, an actor, and screenwriter. And we'll hear a little more about that, I'm sure. So, Holly, welcome.
Thank you. It's so great to be here.
Yeah, and just through serendipity, we connected and we've worked together on multiple books, which has been a pleasure. And you've helped make them interesting and compelling, and we've taken them from there and published them. So it's really worked out great. So tell us, you have this diverse background as a writer and stand-up comedian and actor and screenwriter. Tell us a little more about that.
Well, I guess in the short answer first is that by day I turn people's ideas into books, and by night I try to turn my own ideas into jokes. So that is what definitely takes up the most of my days and nights between ghostwriting and stand-up. However, like you said, I also I have a background as an actor. I lived in New York in my 20s, was an actor off Broadway in New York for a long time. And I still have been writing scripts these last few years and trying to get my scripts made into, entities out there in the world.
Yeah, yeah. And you're in Europe at the moment. You're in Paris and you're performing in the UK and France, yes?
Yes, in English, not in French. I would just clarify in case anybody's wondering. Yeah, there is a lot of people don't realize there's a really great English language comedy scene actually in almost every European city. To be fair, it's bigger than some than others, obviously bigger in London. It's quite big in Berlin. I haven't done Berlin for comedy yet, but it's also a vibrant growing scene in Paris. So I do love spending time here. And because the nature of my work is obviously very easy to do from anywhere, I can truly be a digital nomad and just hop around to where I want to spend time and set up my office from anywhere. So I'm very fortunate that way.
Well, yeah, and you're super impressed that you have 82,000 followers on Instagram, and I follow you at Hall Hud,
Hall
HOLHUD,
Huds. Yeah.
on Instagram, and you do these little bits all the time that are hilarious,
Well, thank
making
you.
fun of both the Brits and the Americans. It's terrific.
Yes, there's no shortage of material, obviously. Yeah, my specialty at the moment seems to be, yeah, comparing either American foibles to British foibles, and then kind of sending up the worst stereotypes of American tourists just to get us all to behave a little bit better when we leave our borders. And it's fun just looking at cultural differences. I've always found it fascinating. Due to I guess the family that I was born into and grew up, we traveled a lot because of my father's work when I was a kid. So I was always just enamored of travel and fascinated by it. And it's not something that I have ever wanted to stop doing. So I still have many more countries that I have not even visited that I hope to just visit and maybe do comedy in as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you have a good excuse for traveling too. I mean, I love traveling as well. I've been to France multiple times and really love the
Oh,
culture and the
fantastic. Yeah.
country, and Yeah, yeah. My wife speaks French fluently, so
Oh,
she's
wow.
she's always anxious to go.
That's
Um,
fantastic. The French get a bad rap. They're really lovely people
they
and
really are
very
great.
quite welcoming.
And if you
So
get out of Paris, it's even more relaxed in the
I'm
country.
I'm sure. I'm sure.
Yeah. It made me think, because of your unique multiple talents, how does comedy inform your writing? And I know it does. I have a partial answer to that, but
Yeah.
why don't you share with us?
Well, I guess I've just been looking for that sort of Venn diagram, that sweet spot over the last few years with the ghostwriting and the comedy. And then suddenly it just occurred to me like, you know, just there's so many nonfiction business books out there, prescriptive nonfiction, and it all just benefits from just a sense of humor. It doesn't have to be, it's not about telling jokes in the writing. It's not about trying to force it, because there are some books out there that do kind of force it. And then it becomes about the humor, and that's sort of annoying, and that's not what you want. But I just always feel that it makes everything stickier, that it just makes, if you can just be authentically a person with a kind of slightly, with a little twist of humor to something that we want to read, that's giving us the information that we want because we want to learn this thing, then that just makes it all the more memorable. So that's why I started to really try to hone in on, bringing my comedic skills into the ghostwriting arena.
And, yeah, and I'll tell you what I observed, and part of the reason I asked the question is one
Hmm.
of the first books we worked on together was a business book. And the subject, I mean, most business books are fairly dry reading.
Yeah.
They're not entertaining. But somehow you took what could have been a dry subject and made it a good read, an interesting read. And I think part of what you did, which I'm a big believer in, is you coaxed the authors to tell stories,
Oh, yeah.
tell you stories, and you included these stories. So instead of a book that says, I did this, this, and this, and you should do that, that, and that,
Hmm.
the anecdotal stories, you can almost read the book just for the stories. And then
That's
it
great.
happens
Yeah.
that there's a context for it in, the particular field that the book was addressing. Um, and I always believed, I've probably said this on somewhere on the podcast before, but if you can entertain people first, then they're open to a message, right? Um, like you, well, not as much as you, but I've done a fair amount of public speaking, and I'm probably not terribly funny, although I do have a good sense of humor. And if you have an audience and you see I'm always watching the faces, which I'm sure you watching for
Hmm.
reaction. And if you see you're losing them a little bit, you say, "Let me tell you a story." Everybody perks up because
Hmm.
people love stories, and that's I think something you bring from your nightlife into your day life in your writing.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's true. And I mean, really, we're humans. We've been telling stories since we're sitting around the campfire rubbing sticks together to make that campfire. I mean, it's part of our nature, I think, and story is what makes things memorable. And I think it's interesting. I just was thinking the other day about how the same goes for comedy too, is like, now I know they're great, one-liner comedians and stuff, and can admire their skill. But when somebody just gets up to tell jokes, just straight jokes, you often don't remember what it is. They're funny, you're laughing, and that feels good. But later you go home and you'd probably be hard pressed to remember what they talked about. But if they told some stories in there that were also funny and had you laughing, then you're going to remember that comedian. Because again, stories are memorable. We're just hardwired for stories. So yeah, I always tell all my authors, like, look, let's tell me your stories. I want to hear, what happened when things went wrong and pear-shaped and the shit hit the fan or whatever the case may be. We want to hear those stories about your experiences.
Yeah, yeah. And I think even in we were talking about it in writing, and obviously we're interested in stories, and I am because I wrote thrillers, so
Yeah.
definitely interested in stories. But there's several business books out there about using stories in leadership and management. I remember reading one called "Managing by Storying Around."
Oh,
And
interesting.
it's, you coaching executives to use stories as part of their management style. So as opposed to telling people you work with, do this, do that, it's let me tell you a story. And it's funny because we have a really wonderful team at Munn Avenue Press. And we were actually on with a new author yesterday, someone you're working with, and I just sidebarred into a story, and I could see the Lily and Neil sort of grimace because he said, "Oh, here he goes again. He's going to tell a story." But 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 for the uninitiated, like this new author, he really appreciated the story. So it's
Oh, let's see. That's
it's
great.
it's part of the fun. So for most people, ghostwriting is kind of a mystery. Like unless you've had contact or involvement with somebody, a
Mm-hmm.
ghostwriter
Mm,
really are like ghosts. They're behind the scenes.
right.
Can you share with us and the people listening, what's it like to be a ghostwriter and what's your process like?
Mm-hmm. Well, we spend a lot of time talking like this on Zoom. It can be done in person, but really most of the time these days, it's on Zoom, and I record all those calls, and then I have transcripts that I make from those calls. So really, it's the beauty of the transcript. Thank goodness for transcription services, because that allows me to capture your voice as the author, to learn, and through a series of interviews where I'm kind of pulling the content for the book, and I'm getting you to talk through the book out loud, essentially, and asking you questions that hopefully maybe you haven't thought of because you know your world and your content so well. My job is to be that outside voice and eyes and ears poking you and saying, yeah, but what about this? But that you're assuming this, or have you thought of it this way? To really, and then in that process, get to know you as the author. And again, how you think, how you talk, what your idiosyncrasies are. And that all gets captured in the transcripts, which then I can go back and read and listen to, as necessary. And from those transcripts in that early process, we spend time doing the book positioning, figuring out where the book sits in the marketplace, in the minds of the reader. Who's your target reader? What do you want them to take away from the book? What do you want to get out of the book? What are some comparable titles already out there? And how's your book going to be different from those? We do all that book positioning stuff first, which is important to do before any writing happens. And then from there, we outline your book. We just try to take the 30,000-foot view of everything we think the book is going to cover. We just throw everything with the kitchen sink in there that, and then try to, out of that, we carve the, hopefully we carve the David out of all that content and ideas. And then once we have a solid outline, then we move to the writing finally. And I write what I like to, I'm sure other ghostwriters have their own version of this, but I call it a tone check chapter, where you write one chapter and you stop again and you confer with the author and make sure the book is sounding, just how they want to sound, or, capturing their voice. And then once we've tweaked that and make sure that we're on track, then it's like off to the races. And I just write. I write the first draft, and I usually share chapter by chapter with the author for feedback as we go. And that's kind of what the process looks like.
Yeah, and how you mentioned voice. Other, yes, you're interviewing them, but how do you kind of get inside the author's head? How do he or she? Because maybe just talk a little bit more about what voice means,
Mm,
because in writing and publishing we use that term a lot, but
yeah.
I don't think everybody is familiar with what that means.
Yeah, it really means like, you know, the tone and the style you want the writing to have. Do you want it to sound very conversational, like you talking to your best friend, or do you want to sound like a combination of your favorite two authors, and then I try to stitch something together to create a new voice? I mean, it's not always necessarily about sounding just like the person. I would say that's what I initially aim for, but sometimes the person wants to sound a bit different. Like, they'll tell me who some of their favorite authors are. And so that gives me an idea of tone and style. I mean, really, I would say, though, for the most part, with, a business book, you want to be clear. You just want to have clear, good language that sounds conversational. I mean, it's kind of across the board as almost like just a requirement, because you want it to be able to be easily read. You don't want a book full of, this is not meant to be a literary work. You don't want a book full of beautiful allusions and literary analogies. That's probably not what you're going for with prescriptive nonfiction, which is what I tend to specialize in. I do work on memoir for people though, so that is a bit more literary.
Right, right. Yeah. Yeah, that the whole concept of voice, even in I write fiction, and I read, obviously, as a publisher for Munn Avenue Press, I read a lot of fiction and nonfiction,
Hmm.
but you can tell when there is an authentic human voice coming through the text.
Yeah.
When it sounds human, which is
Yeah.
kind of goes back to that discussion about, you injecting some humor and such, because people want to read authors that they like, that they feel that
Yes.
the voice is compelling, and they feel like, yeah, I'm connecting with a human being here, not just AI or something like that.
Yeah, totally. Totally.
Um, and I think that's a particular skill that you have in the books that I've read, is that you inject a very authentic voice
Oh,
into
nice.
your
Good.
writing, and that's part of the reason that readers connect.
Hmm.
I think it sets you apart too, in a way, from ghostwriters that are writing straight, you know, books that don't have that human flavor to them.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well,
and
I like to think so. I hope so.
so a number of the authors you work with are either self-published or publishing with people like us.
Hmm.
Is there any particular thing that they can learn from you, or advice that you would give them about creating a good book or a great book?
Mm. Yeah. I would say the most important thing to understand is that it really is a collaboration, and I almost prefer to think of myself as a book collaborator than a ghostwriter, because I always say to every author before we start working together that, the more you put into the book in terms of your ideas and time and reviewing, and the more I put into it, that just the better book that we're going to create. I mean, they need to be really personally invested in the process as well, and not just think that having a ghostwriter means that plop, you just kind of drop all this information and then go off and let the ghostwriter, do it all, because it is very hard work to crawl inside somebody's head and to piece together, thread together all these different parts and have it make sense in a way that as if that person has written it. Now, I would say it's a bit easier to do with prescriptive nonfiction than memoir, because memoir really is like, this is someone's lived experience, and we're telling a narrative story with an arc and, all kinds of things. So that is a whole nother kettle of fish, really. But I guess that's the biggest thing, that first of all, it's okay to work with a ghostwriter. So many people do these days. I mean, there's some statistic out there that like 70% of nonfiction books are ghostwritten. I'm not sure if that's correct, but it's probably pretty close. So it's very, very common, especially for busy entrepreneurs, CEOs, or professionals, or creatives, to work with a writer, and there's nothing to be ashamed of about it, because basically, it's still their ideas, their content, their words, really. I'm just kind of stitching it all together and making it pretty.
Well, and you're a professional writer. I mean,
Yeah,
for most people, that are in business or doing whatever they do in their careers, they're not writing all the time.
for
So
sure.
the ability for them to just say, okay, I'm going to sit down and write a book. I mean, that's a stretch. And even though I've written all my life, when I wrote my first book, I needed help, serious editing help and otherwise, to get it to a point where it was really a good book. And then I like to think that as I wrote books 2, 3, 4, and I've been told, the writing got better. So, but most people aren't at this all the time, or they have one book in them, for their, and the book might be, it might be a good business book. It might be a legacy kind of book,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Where
totally.
they
It's
are,
not all business, right?
yeah. And that's the one book. So they're not looking to be professional writers, but they need professional writing help.
Yes.
And it's interesting too, because in the publishing process, it's very much a collaboration too. That is,
Hmm.
I'm thinking about cover design, for example, and we're we're really into that. I have 3 wonderful designers, and we get input and feedback from the author as to the kinds of things they were thinking about, and then we go off and come up with 4 or 5 concepts, and we bounce it back and forth with the author. And the goal is to both have a cover that is impactful and will get people to buy the book,
Yeah.
because that's the first impression, but also matches the author's vision and relevant to the subject or content or
Hmm.
story in the book. So and it's very much a team effort, and some people do try and do this on their own, and we hear from some of them too that run into a wall and things go haywire. And um, I had a friend recently who tried to publish a book herself and had her daughter do a cover, and the cover was okay. And she asked my opinion, and I said, well, I would do this, this, and that. So she had us redo the covers because it just wasn't there. So that
Right.
having expert help in the writing and designing and formatting and the whole
Yeah.
process.
Yeah.
Uh,
And so many people just don't know anything about the whole publishing world, and they're just kind of, you know, clueless like where to begin. And so it's just helpful to I tell people that I will help them all the way through the process, and that's why it's been so nice to be able to refer people to you. Is like, oh, okay, I can, I mean, because I don't do the publishing aspect. I have no desire or interest. My plate is full enough,
Yeah.
But just to be able to give them trusted advisors through every aspect of the process is really great. And it makes people feel so much better too.
Yeah, and actually that's part of our mutual job because I'm sending authors to you too, is that you become a resource for
Hmm.
that author. So if they need X, Y, or Z help with something, you usually will know somebody, and not the
Hmm.
same
Yeah,
goes for
totally.
me, um, so that they can make it happen. For I talked about that one book, and we did a podcast recently where the title of this is essentially ever dream of writing a book. Well, writing a book is a kind of dream for most
Hmm.
people,
Yeah.
and it's for many it's a bucket list item. So is great satisfaction in helping an author achieve that dream. I mean, they're usually
Yeah.
super excited,
Yeah,
when
totally.
it comes to pass. So I mean, do you as a ghostwriter, your name generally is not on the book. Is how do you feel about that? Is
I
that
mean, no, for the most part, I'm totally cool with that. Sometimes, and I am starting to do a bit more of the written with uh, credit. And that is always an option that I give to people. Would you like to be the sole author? Would you like to, share a credit? And that can be, it just really depends upon the particular situation. Most of the time, I am just the ghost behind. But yeah, in certain situations, I don't mind, being on, you know, as a co-author.
sure, sure, and as a performer, you want credit, right?
I mean,
Um,
yeah, for some things, I think
for
it's
some
good. It just
things,
depends upon the
sure.
subject matter and what makes sense.
So, what's an ideal client or author for you?
Well, I think kind of like I was saying before, is like somebody who is really invested and recognizes, is excited. Also, someone who's really excited about their book and is doing it because they've had ideas, they've been carrying around about it for quite a while and is willing to put in the time to spend hours discussing the book and, reviewing chapters and all that. So I just feel like really the ideal client is somebody who is invested in the process and willing to give of themselves and share their ideas. And it helps if you're organized and can come to the interviews having thought about things for sure. That's always a plus.
Well,
But
yeah, yeah. Your
yeah,
point though about it's a commitment to write a book.
it is. Even if they're
Whether
not
they
doing the writing, it's still a commitment.
It's still a commitment. It's a commitment of time to work with
Yeah.
you. And if you're writing the book yourself, it's a big commitment. And a lot of people don't have the stick-to-itiveness to get to the end.
Hmm.
So that's a very good point. And for those of you who are interested in some help writing your book, and you have a nonfiction book, you can reach out to Holly at hudsonholly.com. And she's
Yes.
also on LinkedIn under Holly Hudson. And talk to her about it. It's worth a conversation if you are interested in doing that. Um, yeah. So what's next for you? Anything new in the works?
Oh, gosh. There's always things in the works.
What are you working on for yourself? I'd be interested in that.
Wow. Yes, I am trying to get my romantic comedy script made. I want to be part of the producing process. So, and it's set between Paris and the US. So I'm trying to get that made. And I also have a TV pilot for a comedy that my writing partner and I we're going to make a kind of like a proof of concept for the pilot. We're going to do that this coming year. Doing a lot of comedy. I'm getting ready to probably sometime early next year tape my first comedy special with a comedy production company based in Cincinnati called
terrific.
3x4, or is it 2x4? 3x4 comedy. And so that will be something that's a big, kind of thing for me to work towards. So I'm working on my first hour of comedy. I mean, when we say that, we usually mean less than an hour, but that's, my first real solid show. So I'm workshopping that in different places. I just workshopped it here in Paris the other night.
And by workshopping, you mean trying stuff out and seeing what kind of reaction you get, right?
Just working through new bits and old bits and trying to make a coherent, chunk hour of comedy that is threaded together, again, by story and themes and all that good stuff. So that's something I'm working on. I mean, I guess I have several other writing projects that I can't even think of at the moment that are, my own projects, but it's difficult. It's always a balancing act, and not one I necessarily do very well, trying to balance the ghostwriting work with all my other, personal projects.
Sure.
It's
interesting that, that development of a comedy special. Some years ago, my wife and I used to love to go to the Improv in New York.
Mm-hmm.
And with some frequency, famous comedians would show up just to try stuff out. So, I mean, we saw Rodney Dangerfield there, and Andy Kaufman, and
amazing.
And Andy Kaufman came and did some really weird thing where he would pick up a chair, move it to the other side of the stage, then pick it up, move it back, and not say a word. And I think he just wanted to see what kind of reaction he got. And I'll tell you a really funny improv story.
Mm-hmm.
It's the middle of the winter. It's really cold. And we're online for like the 10:30 show at the Improv.
Yeah.
So, and I'm wearing a heavy parka, and all of a sudden the stage door swings open.
Uh-huh.
The comedian comes out onto the street, grabs me, pulls me into the Improv, and I'm on stage with him at the Improv in my parka in the middle of the winter. Yeah. So it was part of his bit was to grab somebody off the street and bring them in. And I'm a bit of a ham, and I just got into it, and it was really such a funny experience.
That's great.
Accidental comedian for one.
Yeah. Oh my God.
So, Holly, this has been so wonderful talking to you. And again, for those interested, if you go to hudsonholly.com, you can contact Holly there. And if you have a book and you're interested in publishing it, well, please check out munnavenuepress.com. And at munnavenuemuse.com, there's many, many episodes of this podcast. It's also on YouTube and Spotify and Apple Music. And one cool thing is if you have an iPhone or a Amazon Echo device, and you say Siri or Alexa, play the most recent episode of the Munn Avenue Muse podcast, it will come right up and play. So until next time, again, thank you for being here, Holly.
Thank you so much for having me, Charlie. It was an absolute pleasure.